Hello and welcome to this Senior Code Review Buddy Tip. Today I'm going to briefly talk about where to initialize variables and walk through a few small examples, including some I grabbed from my own code. The basic idea for variable initialization is to try and declare variables as close as possible to where you're going to use them. By minimizing the distance that a variable is used over, you reduce the amount of space that people, including yourself, reading the code need to think about the variable for. This can make it easier to read the code because there are fewer parts to think about at each point. I think it's pretty easy to see the advantage here when the distance is huge, like when you can't fit the computation and the use on a single screen and you have to scroll back and forth to sort of like look at the two. But even smaller spaces I think it can help. Let's walk through a few examples. Alright, here we've got a little function that I wrote up as an example. This could be a helper function for a website that sells some kind of physical product. We've got a subtotal, tax rate, whether or not the users use express shipping or not, and we got to compute the total for them. So first off, we see that the tax computation is pretty simple. It's just the subtotal times the tax rate. The shipping's a little more complex. We have express and regular shipping, and we have two different thresholds for determining if it's free, as well as two different thresholds to determine the cost of each of them. And we just add the ones to get the values together. The first thing I notice is that we compute tax total quite a ways before we use it. But also we're using it at the same time we use shipping total. This is all kind of related to shipping total, so it's not necessarily the worst thing. One thing we could do is we could move tax total down to here, so it's closer to this section, and shipping total is also closer. Everything's a little bit closer to maybe a little easier to read, but I think there's maybe a better way we can do this. If we look at this, the shipping stuff, it's a bit complex, there's quite a bit of it. This is probably actually a very good candidate to move into a helper function. So we could have something like define compute shipping total, and then we can just move all of that code into there. We'll pass in the subtotal and use express shipping, and then down here we can just have shipping total equals compute shipping total. And now if we look at this, the tax total is much closer than it was before, just a single line, because we've moved all of those lines into a helper function, so it makes it a lot easier to see. Looking at the helper function now, I can also see, and as I talked about before, there's kind of the two patterns for regular and express shipping. They're very similar. So we could probably pull this out to a helper function instead of having the repeated code here. So I've got an example here where I've sort of done just that. And I think this reads a lot easier than that original code we had. All the functions are fairly small, variables are fairly close to where they're being used. One thing that I would probably change to actually make this more readable in the future is, instead of using these hard-coded constants here, create variable constants where the names can provide the meaning for what these values are. For example, this 200, it's probably cleaner if it would say something like free express shipping cutoff amount equals 200. It also makes it easier to change it because you just have to sort of find that one spot if we needed to use it in multiple spots. Alright, let's move to another example for some code I used in a personal project. So this is from a small project that I wrote to manage copying my podcasts over to my Android phone. This is a small constructor for each podcast episode. Let's see if we can improve it. Alright, so first off, we are setting path equals path and index equals index. I don't think that does anything useful, but let's look at where we're using these variables. Maybe there's a reason I did this. So looking at path, yeah, there's quite a few uses of path, but they're all just reading it. There's no changes to it or anything. There's no reason to do a setting like this or anything weird going on, so I'm pretty sure we don't need that. And then index, similar thing. We use it one spot, just passing it in. So I don't think we actually need either of these. I think these are just dead lines of code that we can safely delete. I actually had poked around a little more and confirmed that, yeah, they are safe to delete. I think what happened here is this used to be an instant function instead of a class function, and I think in the past these have been self.index and self.path. And when this changed, I obviously fixed it by doing that and not realizing that they were entirely pointless. So This isn't even about moving variables closer to where they're used. This is deleting things that kind of were getting used, but were pointless declarations. Alright, let's move on to the final sample. So this is another function from my podcast program. I try to keep all the podcast episodes on my phone in sync with a folder on my computer. This function handles deleting the episodes from my computer after they have been deleted from my phone. Alright, so first thing I notice looking at this is the very first thing we do is we store the date, okay? But then we only use it all the way down here. Okay, and I don't think that even happens all the time, because we'll only get here if we are able to run this process successfully. So we see the phone and we get the list of files there. We then go through all of the files that are stored locally on the computer. If there's a file that is locally on the computer and not on the phone, we will then prompt a user for deletion, and then if the user says yes, then we'll delete it and need the time. So given that this is a value we'll only be using conditionally, it seems odd to be setting it all the time up here. Also, because we're setting it up here, we're going to have the value from here in time, not the now here. That might not be too big a deal if everything was happening instantaneous here and we knew it was fast, but we actually know this will probably be quite slow because we're getting user input here. So this is going to wait some time to get feedback from a user, myself usually, before moving on. So this can take quite a lot of time. So if it's going to take this time, we probably don't actually want to use the time here. This is the time the function started. We probably want to use the time that the file was actually deleted. So I think what we want to do is move this down to here. Now if you look at this scope is much smaller. You don't start looking at the function and try to figure out, okay, what's date? Why is it important? Why do we need the date now? What are we using it for? With that, I think this function's a little easier to fix, and I have submitted this change to my local version of this. So that's all I have for today. I hope in the future you think more about where you're declaring your variables, maybe see if you can change things such they are closer where they need to be to make it easier to read for you or others. If you have any suggestions or ideas for topics that you would like me to cover, you can reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks, and have a great day.